reach back into your childhood, pluck out a movie, give it a rewatch, and have a chat about it. I'm Emily Slade, and welcome back.
You watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, what?
What am I watching?
Why
What is this?
Why this film?
And I'm joined today by Laura, and I'm joined today... yeah, no, that is right. What am I doing? Quarantine. It's driving me insane. I've actually got Keanu hair rocking right now. Like, I'm not going to show it to you because it's ghastly, but yeah, I'm joined by Em from Verbal Diorama podcast, and you also write for
Film Stories.
That's the one.
I
do not have my notes.
It's okay.
Hello and welcome. Sorry.
Hi. Hi, Emily. Thanks so much for having me.
You are more than welcome. Thank you for everything that you've done for me up until this point.
Well, I mean, it's not like I've found a cure for cancer or anything. I mean, I wrote a little article on you for Film Stories, and that's kind of how we kind of got to know each other.
Yeah, definitely. And it was so exciting. Like, it genuinely was. The day it came out, I was like, I can see it. I felt like
I get that a lot. But
yeah, you
the reason why I do it.
Yeah.
Because I kind of feel very much like independent podcasting is such a slog, just generally. And when you are kind of, putting yourself out there every week and, working hard and whatever kind of podcasting you're doing, it doesn't just have to be, movie podcast, any sort of independent podcasting. You basically get little to no recognition from anyone. So that's part of the reason why I do it. It's basically just to shine a little light on basically everyone who's working really hard, actually, because it's not easy. And just bring a little bit of joy into people's ears every so often.
I love it. I will link to the article if you guys want to read the write-up. I like it, but I'm biased, so.
Well, as long as you like it, then that's the main thing.
And we are here today to talk about 1989's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the IMDb breakdown. Two seemingly dumb teens set off on a quest to prepare the ultimate historical presentation with the help of a time machine. Why this film?
Because it's excellent every time. Because it's joyous and fantastic. It deals with time travel in a very easy to understand yet very as scientifically accurate as you could possibly make it. It obviously stars the wonderful Mr. Keanu Reeves, a man who anyone who's listened to my podcast will know I just love him more than anything else in the world. So when I was given the opportunity to come on here and Emily asked me, what do you want to do? It was like, it's kind of got to be this. Specifically, I know that there's a lot of people out there who have this conversation about, well, you've got Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and you've got Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. A lot of people will prefer Excellent Adventure and a lot of people prefer Bogus Journey.
Oh, interesting.
I like Bogus Journey because I like that it's so weird and different and just completely totally different as well. I do enjoy Bogus Journey, but I love Excellent Adventure. I think it's amazing, and the other amazing thing is we're obviously getting a sequel, a third part of this trilogy this year, and I can't tell you how excited I am, and I also can't tell you how quickly I will be at the front of the queue. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if cinemas are open by that point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I will be there whenever it comes out. I'm so excited for that.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you about that because I saw that it was coming out. Because I watched this on TV once, which basically means that I didn't watch it and it was on in the background. I don't think I've seen Bogus Journey. I didn't know there was a third one coming out until I watched this one and then did some research. And I kind of vaguely knew about it, and I knew the sort of be excellent to yourself, party on vibe of it. But beyond that, I didn't know anything. It's a joy. Like, it's genuinely a joy. I will be interested to see how they do the third parter, because as I was watching it, I was like, I know for a fact that they do not make these movies anymore. They don't make this kind of, they don't allow movies to be this relaxed and fun anymore. Like, it's mostly montage. This movie is like 60% montage. And it part of me was like, you know, it started and I was like, oh, this isn't going to pass the Bechdel test, is it? And it doesn't. I don't think it's trying to. I think it would be nice if they did something today to make the point that women did exist in history and it wasn't just full of dudes.
Yeah.
But I like, it's 1989, like, I get it, it's fine, like, that's just me being like, meh, 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 meh. And I know in the third one they've got a lot more, like, women in it, so, that's fine. But, yeah, it's really not, like, anything I've seen before. It's, I don't know, I've never seen Wayne's World either, or, like, it sort of reminded me of, like, Dude, Where's My Car, but, like, better.
Oh yeah, I mean it's I think it's very easy to just dismiss this as just a slacker comedy, and just like, oh well, you've got two really dumb guys who you know, have to pass this test, and so they jump in a time machine in order to pass their history exam. And I think on a basic level, yeah, I mean that is essentially what it is. But I think it's really fascinating to me about how it deals with intelligence, and how you've got different levels and different types of intelligence. I mean, I think there's a psychologist, and he detailed, I think, 9 different types of intelligence that human beings have. But outwardly, you could quite easily say that Bill and Ted aren't smart. You know, they come across as a bit, oh, dude, you know, a little bit like that Dude, Where's My Car that you mentioned kind of thing, like, dude, where's my car? Like, I don't know, dude, you know, but, you know, the fact that they seem very kind of monotonous, I think, with their sort of speech, the fact that they want to start a band and they've got this thing about working with Eddie Van Halen, so they've got these big aspirations and dreams, but they don't quite have the talent or the aptitude to kind of, because they're like, oh, well, you know, let's work with Eddie Van Halen. It's like, yeah, but dude, we don't know how to play. It's like, yeah, dude, maybe we should learn. And it's just, and then their conversations are really interesting because they kind of go around in circles where they talk about working with Eddie Van Halen, and then they say, well, we need to actually learn to play music. But then they're like, yeah, but we won't learn to play music without Eddie Van Halen. And I find that fascinating, but I mainly kind of find it quite interesting that although they are very outwardly intelligent, first of all, the movie never kind of shames them for that. The movie just kind of lets them be who they are as characters. But I think it also kind of highlights that these are actually intelligent guys. Just because someone might not speak the same way as you do, or, you know, have academic intelligence like you might.
It's that like the expectation of just retaining information that is not relevant. Like, that's not a sign of intelligence. And actually, when you hear them talk to each other where they're trying to study, they know exactly what they're talking about. Like, he knows about Captain Ahab from Moby Dick, and they know that, like, this person's on this money and this person is associated with this thing, and, like, they're not completely stupid. Also, any fucking school that's like, if you don't pass history, you're getting kicked out. Like, what school puts that kid's career on, like, the history lesson? Like, that, it's not one of the main 3. Like I get it because the movie, but I was just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Why history? Like, why is history so important? And we also had the appearance of the classic that is still used to this day, weirdly, the dad that is for some reason desperate to ship his boy off to military camp. Like,
yeah, like, what is it with that? I don't get it.
It's such a trope, and like
It really is.
Like you even see it in like sex education, which is really recent.
Yes,
It's all
yes,
over the
exactly.
place, and they're just like, if I've given you the opportunity to be a teenager, and now I'm bored of letting you try and scrape through school, so because of my values, I'm going to send you to military school, and as like a punishment, but also like not like it's always as a punishment, but if they want to send them to military school, why don't you just send them to... I don't get it. It's a weird trope.
Yeah.
Always dads, always for boys. You never get mums sending their girls off to military camp.
No. And it's also like, you've got to kind of ask yourself the question, what will military school actually achieve for a character like Ted? Because Ted is obviously, he's the kind of guy, and obviously Bill as well, that they don't excel at academia. So you put them in a classroom and they're just like, yeah, whatever, dude, you know, and it's like, they obviously don't flourish in that environment, but put them in a practical environment where they actually have to learn the skills necessary in order to put the pieces together. I kind of don't see how sending him to a military school where it's obviously, you know, army officers, it's all very strict, it's all very regimented, and all of that. I don't see how that would actually help him. It would probably just make it worse.
Literally, it always feels like it's a form of discipline, but then it's like, well, why didn't you just discipline your child in the first place, angry dad? Like, oh, I'll send you to military camp where you get some real discipline and you learn how to be a man. You're the parental figure here. Why haven't you disciplined your child? Like, or like, yeah, it's stupid, but it's nice. It adds a little bit of threat to like, oh, if we don't do this. I mean, there's enough threat. I liked that we were time traveling, but not once was there a fear of like, oh no, we might get stuck in the past, or oh no, how are we going to return these historical figures to their time in history, or oh no, we might literally die. Like, they have a little bit where it's like, oh no, one of them's dead, but like it lasts about 20 seconds, and the entire time you're like, no one is convinced that Keanu Reeves is dead. Like,
what makes me laugh so much is that it does play a little bit fast and loose with accuracy, and but one of the greatest things about this film is that, you know, you see his character fall down the stairs in a whole suit of armor. And then he's lying at the bottom, and then obviously the sword goes in, and then you think, oh no, you know, could they have possibly killed off Keanu Reeves? Why would you? He's the most handsome man on the planet, of course. I mean, obviously he was wearing a helmet, so they didn't know he was Keanu Reeves, but that's beside the point. But then the audience is expected to believe that he fell down the stairs, he recovered from falling down the stairs enough to not only get his entire
self out of a suit of armor.
Self out of a suit of armor, and then lay it out properly in such a way that it looked like he was still lying there. And I'm just like, this movie is incredible.
I think that's it. That's the word for it. Because I was watching bits of it, and I was like, you cannot come for this movie because it is literally telling you, like, why bother? Why bother coming for this movie? We're not here to do anything except have a really good time. So they're like escorting Socrates out from the ruins of Athens into their time machine. All of these people, Genghis Khan, Joan of Arc, they're all completely chill, traveling through time. They're all just completely cool about it. Genghis Khan willingly cleans a toilet. Freud hoovers the couch with like no worries. None of them are like shocked by the technology. They can all breathe in the air. They don't catch colds or anything. Like, it really is just like dumb fun. And I don't mean dumb in like it's like it is stupid, but it's like
it's fantastical.
I think that's what it is. And like, it does make you, I sat there and I was like, ooh, like, it would be fun. And this is the thing, this is why I don't think they would do it today, because today people would be like, oh no, we need to make it more grounded in a reality. This movie is not grounded in any reality, not even our own. And I think that's what lets it get away with how it is. And I think that's what makes it fun, because it is pure like popcorn movie.
Yeah. And but like I say, the thing that I like about it is, yes, it is just a pure fun popcorn movie. You could stick it on now. There is a lot for it is a family movie. You know, that's kind of how I was first introduced to it, is watching it, you know, with family. And it's a movie that does, I think, really endure. Considering its age, you know, I mean, it's over 30 years old. But the reason I think it still endures is a really, really simple one. And I think it's the sort of baseline message of the movie, which is be excellent to each other.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think it's so simple, but it's so effective, and it bears repeating. It resonates through to today, because I think everyone could be, you know, more excellent to each other. It's something that I kind of always take from it, that fundamentally, yes, Bill and Ted, they're not academically clever, you know, but they have an emotional intelligence, and they have like sort of a societal intelligence in a way, to sort of say, well, yeah, we should all just be more excellent to each other. You know, we as humans, we have a tendency to, you know, put each other down, or you know, discriminate against each other for stupid reasons. And it's like, no, actually, if we were all just more excellent to each other, then maybe this utopia that you know, that Bill and Ted will actually achieve in 2688, you know, maybe that is a possibility if we are just follow the mantra of be excellent to each other.
Literally. And they have a willingness to learn, and they have an enthusiasm when they're interested in the subject, and all it took was just a different route to go back to the ways of learning, and how that doesn't define your intelligence. They proved that, like, look, we found a way to get just as much information, if not more, out of something without having to just sit down and read a textbook and then recite it. Like, there are more practical and interesting ways to learn and teach as well. Like, I think one of the things I read was that Alex Winter gets a lot of letters from teachers saying, like, thank you for inciting a love of history or an interest in history into my students, but also you've ruined the way they want to talk. Like, their English is now shit, but their interest in history is like surged. And I think it's really cool to have a time traveling, because I compare it to something off the top of my head like Time Bandits, which I've never actually finished watching because I found it quite boring. But it's similar vibes, where you go back in time and you like bump into all of these historical figures, but it had a seriousness to it that this doesn't. And even though they're very much just paying lip service to these different things, hopefully you could, I mean, I don't know if it was for you, you would be like, oh, that's interesting, I wonder who that person is, and then you're more likely to look into them and expand your knowledge of history, just purely from the snapshot of seeing them in the telephone box with Bill and Ted. So that could be really cool. I don't like that they're like literally all men, but I get it. It's 1989.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
But that's the thing. It's not the most feminist of movies, and I think you know, and I'm sure you feel the same, that as a woman, you know, you tend to kind of find yourself really looking into these sorts of movies and kind of going, well, actually, there were no women behind the scenes. There's no women really in front of the camera other than the princesses who barely speak, and Bill's hot stepmother. But the thing is, at least with Bill, he doesn't know much, but at least he knows what an Oedipal complex is.
Right, that was so funny.
Because like they mentioned, like, the stepmother is only a few years older than they are. And in the sequel, she's actually married to Ted's father.
Oh my god.
So yeah, she basically switches fathers.
That's
which is quite
insane.
funny. But yeah, it's I kind of can't really look at it with those kind of goggles, though, because I kind of feel like sometimes you just need to sit and watch a film and enjoy it. Definitely. And not just sit and examine what
it's missing.
Yeah.
It's like, I do get it. I think because I'm coming to it pretty much for the first time in 2020, I am looking at it and being like, oh, that's a shame. But I think if I'd watched it a lot more when I was younger, because there's lots of movies that don't have like women in them or good women characters in them, and I still enjoy them because I was indoctrinated, like I watched them when I was so young
Mm-hmm.
that I was just like, I love this movie for what it is. It doesn't have to say anything about womanhood or female
It's
characters.
just nostalgia, isn't it?
Yeah, whereas like, because this is new to me, it was a very prominent issue that I was having, that I was like, women are prizes in this movie and I resent that. But it's not about that. Like,
No.
and they're really nice to the women. They don't treat them bad. They don't like.
No, they're sweet
disrespect
guys.
them.
They're just really
Excellent.
lovely, innocent, sweet guys.
Yeah,
Like
they really are.
It's really interesting because I think a lot of movies that have predominantly male protagonists, if you look at something like American Pie, for example, like literally all they care about is losing their virginity and having sex and finding hot women and having sex and losing their virginity.
Yeah.
Whereas, well, at least with something like Bill and Ted, yes, they are young guys. Yes, they do fancy women because they fancy Bill's stepmother, like, you know, clearly. But that's not the be all and end all of this tale for them. Yes, they see the princesses, and Ted specifically, you know, says, oh, he sees his princesses from afar, and he's like, dude, I'm in love. And it's like, and it's like the whole concept of love at first sight, and it's very. I think it could come across as very, you know, a little bit kind of smarmy if done, you know, differently.
Yeah.
But in this, it just feels very innocent. It feels like first crush.
And I think that is because of the casting. I think the casting of Keanu and Alex Winter made these characters who they were. They made them so likable. Like, you hear about the original concepts of what the characters were meant to be. These two guys are just so likable and watchable and comforting to be in the presence of, and you trust them, and they're just having a good time and their friendship is strong. They could so easily have been up themselves a little bit more, or like nasty or mean or like toxic, but they're just really not, and I genuinely think that's down to the casting.
Absolutely. I know that obviously Keanu Reeves is literally a household name. I think everyone in the world knows who he is. Alex Winter, obviously not so much now, and I think Alex Winter gets a lot more stick than I think is deserved, because I kind of feel like obviously Keanu was this kind of standout star. He basically then he'd obviously had a career before this, but he really kind of came into the public consciousness with this and Parenthood, and then a couple of years after this, Point Break came out, which kind of cemented, I think, his star in Hollywood. But Alex Winter is actually quite an accomplished director in his own right.
Oh, wow.
And he's actually more involved in Hollywood than I think a lot of people think he is.
That's cool.
But you know, I kind of feel like I've read quite a lot of articles, especially, you know, when this was coming up to its 30th anniversary, there was quite a lot of articles out there, and a lot of them were like, oh yeah, you know, Keanu Reeves, he's so great in this movie, and then they were like, oh, and Alex Winter, who's that? And it's like, don't be disrespectful to the man.
It's like all those actors that were in movies, and then they like took 30 years out to like be on the stage, and they were like heavily on the stage, but because they weren't in movies, these articles are always like, oh my god, their career like died in 1997 and no one's ever heard of them again, and it's so tragic. And it's like, they were on the Globe Theatre for 25 years. Like, fucking hell, like, they're still doing shit, they're just not in your stupid Hollywood movies. Like, there is more to art than the movies. It's very, very frustrating, because I used to be one of those people. I used to be like, oh my god, poor them, like they just stopped working, I guess. And then you're like, no, they did like television or radio or voiceover or like one of the many other things. I probably enjoyed it more. Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, you've got to pay your bills. If you're not getting the lucrative Hollywood, you know, starring roles, you've got to pay your bills somehow. And I kind of feel like as a society, we kind of have this image of celebrity, and that if you're not, you know, up there in like the A-list or the B-list, and you know, you might, you know, you happen to be further down the ladder, and you might be doing commercials, or like you say, you might be doing something else, you might even be working in Tesco's. You know, it doesn't matter, you know. A, at least you're still putting food on the table, and B, at least you're actually contributing to society in some way. And I kind of feel like there's a massive stigma
especially in the tabloid press, who are just the worst of the worst anyway, to vilify people who, just because they're not at the level of Keanu Reeves, it doesn't mean that they're not valuable.
It doesn't mean that they failed as
Exactly.
people. You probably don't want to be Keanu Reeves. From what I vaguely know about the poor man is that he's had a very hard and tragic life.
Yeah.
And, like, that's super sad. And, like, yes, he could have all the money in the world and all the fame in the world, but that's not going to bring back people that he's lost over the years or, like, hardships that he's gone through. And, like, people always forget about that as well.
Yeah.
I think he's got a shtick as one of the, like, nicest people in Hollywood. That's what I know about Keanu Reeves, that he's just an absolute darling.
Yeah.
And I fully believe it. If anything were to ever come out, like, shitting on Keanu Reeves, I just wouldn't believe it unless I had hard proof. Because, you know, some people you can be like, yeah, I'd believe that there'd be a bit of a dirt. Like, you hear these stories about Ellen and you're like, yeah, I could believe that. Keanu Reeves, he's an angel. From the very little that I know about him, he's an angel.
Absolutely. Like, and that's the thing. And I think that's his enduring appeal is, you know, I always make a point of saying quite regularly about how attractive he is. And he is probably the most attractive man in the entire world. The man does not age either. I mean, he still looks incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, if he came to my house and he was like, oh, you know, do you fancy going on a date with me? I'd be like, yes, please.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think a lot of his appeal does come down to his character and about the stories that we hear. We don't hear much about him other than, like you've mentioned, the tragedies that have occurred in his life, which, you know, you don't wish upon anyone.
No.
But, you know, I think the fact that the stories that come out about him tend to be of things like him giving up his seat on public transport for a pregnant lady, or, you know, signing autographs for kids in the park.
Literally.
And it's just, he is the sort of person that you want in your life, you know, just like genuine, just as, you know, just as a friend.
She's an absolute sweetheart.
Ideally as a lover, but just, you know, as a friend. Exactly. But, no, I think he is one of the best. I think just generally, he puts everything into every role, and I feel very strongly that a lot of the time he is. People will say, "Oh, well, you know, he can't act. Keanu Reeves can't act," because and they'll cite something like Bram Stoker's Dracula as a reason for why he can't act. Which, you know, as far as I'm concerned, he'd come off a run of movies at that time. He was absolutely knackered, and he took a role. And yes, he was miscast, but the movie itself is actually phenomenal.
The movie's brilliant, and the thing is, I believe him as Jonathan Harker. He looks right. I think people mistake a bad accent with bad acting, and perhaps it does affect. If you're desperately trying to do this accent, your acting will inevitably suffer because you're concentrating so hard on how you're saying it. You're not thinking about why you're saying it, and that's what acting is fundamentally. And I think it's that, and then you think, you know, if I think about Keanu Reeves, if I ignore Always Be My Maybe, where I've not seen any Keanu Reeves movies, but that's my favourite role he's ever done.
Oh, he's great, isn't he? I love him in that.
Such a joy. You do think the things that come to mind are like Point Break, Constantine, John Wick, movies that I've never seen, but because they're sort of whitewashed with this like, action, often like supernatural action almost, that sort of like fantastical action. So it's like the lowest rung of the lowest rung of the genres, because people don't take action movies seriously, they don't take fantasy movies seriously, and if you combine the two, usually that results in a Keanu Reeves movie, and therefore I think people are then like, oh well, then he clearly can't act because they're just putting Keanu Reeves in a movie to move around some fancy sets and get a hot woman in and then call it a day. But I completely believe that he's a phenomenal actor. In the very few things that I've seen him in, he's always but it's funny, isn't it? It's very easy to paint these people from the genres that they choose, the projects that they opt in for, and then just make assumptions based on the sort of caliber of those movies. Like if he was in all the Oscar bait movies and people still didn't watch him in them, they might then be like, oh, well, he's a very good actor. But because he takes these movies that are not art in some people's opinions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, on my podcast, I mean, I've featured him specifically, his movies specifically, on a few occasions. I've done an episode on Speed, which is the standard kind of action movie that everyone kind of goes to. It's still great. And then, you know, the other thing that Keanu is very well known for is sort of sci-fi action, and I've done The Matrix as well, which is kind of the pinnacle of his career, really.
I've completely forgotten everything that Keanu Reeves is in, which in my head shows that he's a good actor, because he's like invisible within the movie. He like melds into the movie so much that you say Keanu Reeves, and all I could think of was a movie where he literally plays Keanu Reeves. Because everything else, he becomes that character, arguably. I completely fucking forgot that he was in the fucking Matrix.
But this is the thing, right? And I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that you say Keanu Reeves, and instantly your mind goes to these, you know, specific movies, like, you know, things like The Matrix and Speed. But he's not playing Keanu Reeves in any of those movies.
No.
You know, when he's in The Matrix, he is Neo.
He's Neo, yeah.
You know, and Constantine is another one that I've done, and I absolutely love Constantine, because it's based on a comic book. It's not faithful really to that comic book at all, but it's still absolutely wonderful. It's a real visual treat. And in that movie, he is John Constantine. He's not the John Constantine that people know, you know, from the comic books, but he is John Constantine in that movie. And I would kind of say to anyone, if you don't believe that Keanu Reeves is a good actor, then I just have 3 words, and that is The Devil's Advocate.
Ooh. Because
The Devil's Advocate, I think, is one of the best performances he's ever done. So you're searching for The Devil's Advocate now, aren't you? It's a truly incredible film. It's based around him being a lawyer, and he has to...
I've seen that DVD in Woolworths before.
Yeah, Woolworths back in the day. It's a great movie. I don't want to say too much about it because it's but essentially it's him making a deal with the devil.
Oh, classic.
And
I'm gonna go through and watch all the dealing with the devil movies at one point. It looks better than Bedazzled, I'll give it that.
I mean, well, Bedazzled has its charms. It has Brendan Fraser.
It has Brendan Fraser, for one.
Brendan Fraser is one of my absolute favourites. I've always said that I still rate The Mummy 1999 as one of the greatest films ever made.
Boy.
So
I guessed on a podcast talking about that for about 3 hours. I adore that movie.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest. I've done an episode on it myself, and it was a long one. Could have been longer. But yeah. It's anyway, we're not here to talk about Brendan Fraser. I feel like we're going off topic, but yeah, as far as Keanu's concerned, I would say don't believe anyone who tells you Keanu Reeves is not a good actor. He is a great actor. That's why he's constantly still working. You know, he's constantly still making movies because he's a good actor.
And he clearly is a good person to work with. I imagine he always turns up on time, knows his lines, doesn't bump into the furniture, doesn't treat people like shit. Like, it's like if people are nice to work with, they will continue to get work, because why wouldn't they?
Exactly. I think I'm trying to remember exactly which movie it was, but there was a story in the press of him. I think it might have been The Matrix, actually, off the top of my head, but I'm pretty certain he donated some of his salary to the crew, because obviously he was making, you know, millions and millions of dollars, and you know, a crew member on a movie like that is really not going to be making that much money. So yeah, he apparently donated part of his salary to them. So he's just such a
so easy for him to do as well, because even with probably donating 50% of his salary, he still has more money than you probably ever need. And like, just a complete lack of greed is just so attractive in people.
I know, right?
God, I'm like coming into your like little Keanu box. I'm like, the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, God damn, Keanu.
He's a wonderful human being, and he's literally the most attractive man in the world. So he is the full package, basically.
Yeah, he seems literally perfect.
I know, and that's why That's why I love him so much. And I think that's one of the reasons, because this, like I said, this was one of the first kind of big movies that he did. And I kind of feel like this is a lot of the of my kind of generation's first look at this man as an actor. And when you see it, you're kind of a little bit like, well, you know, he's great at pretending to be an idiot, but then you look at Keanu in real life and he's nothing like that. So actually, he is a pretty great actor.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I was like, it's that thing where like you need to be really clever to play like stupid very well, like slapstick and comedy and all of these things tend to be done better of people that are like really talented and smart. It's not that easy to play a likable idiot. It could have gone so wrong with the wrong casting.
Exactly. And I think I remember a quote, I think it was Lisa Kudrow, who plays Phoebe in Friends, and obviously Phoebe in Friends is very ditzy, you know, very daft and says silly things, but Lisa Kudrow is actually incredibly intelligent in real life, and she was, you know, worried about taking the part because she was like, well, people are going to think that I'm like this character.
Think I'm dippy,
But she is, and I still think to this day, Phoebe in Friends is one of the standout great characters of that show, and it's all down to Lisa Kudrow being that smart to be able to know
to deliver those lines,
the lines. And I still think, I know Friends is controversial, and I think it has its issues, you know. When we're talking about a show that's like 20 plus years old.
Oh yeah, I've never seen it. I'm not even gonna lie, I've never seen Friends.
Okay, well, it's like
it's too late now.
Yeah, the Friends is mired in a lot of nostalgia for a lot of people. It's something that I grew up with, a lot of people grew up with. So I get the whole, you know, Friends is brilliant, Friends is the best, and all of that. But you actually kind of watch it now, and there are very problematic things in Friends. But the standout, I think, standout character throughout all of Friends is Phoebe.
That's fair.
And she and only Lisa Kudrow, as far as I'm concerned. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to be very intelligent, very smart to be able to act that stupid.
That's sort of dumb, successfully.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about George Carlin. I thought he was going to be in this movie a lot more than he actually is.
He's really not in it all that much, is he?
He's in it for literally probably 5 minutes max.
Yeah.
7 minutes, something like that. I thought he was there the whole time for some reason. I was like, and George Carlin. But no, he's like a cameo almost.
Yeah, it is pretty much an extended cameo. But what I like about it is, I mean, this is probably the first thing that I ever saw of George Carlin. And to be honest, I don't really know too much about him as a performer. So I'm really kind of only going on Rufus as my main kind of point of knowledge for the whole of George Carlin's work, which I'm sure he's had a very successful, very long career outside of Bill and Ted. But yeah, Rufus is kind of the only thing I know him for, sadly.
Well, I think he's a comedian, isn't he? He was a stand-up comedian. But I only know him from Dogma, because he plays the cardinal in Dogma, Kevin Smith's movie about religion.
Yes. Do you know what? I think that shows how long it's been since I've seen Dogma, because I remember really enjoying Dogma back when I saw it, but I've not seen it for so long.
Oh, give it a rewatch. I love it so much. I don't know what I'm talking about, but he didn't seem to bring anything to the role that couldn't have been done by literally anyone else, because the role wasn't a thing. Does that make sense? The role was not fleshed out enough or enough of a thing. It was very forgettable, very small part. I know they wanted someone like Sean Connery to begin with, and they ended up with George Carlin, and they were very happy about it. But honestly, it could have been an unknown and have the same effect. It was a very non-part, considering that it was George Carlin as Rufus. And I was like, but that could have been a lamp, and the same result would have happened. I don't know, maybe that's controversial.
I think that where you've got the whole kind of and George Carlin thing, it kind of does set it up as being a bit more than what it is. And I mean, certainly, I remember because I mean, I've seen this movie quite a few times in recent years, but before that, it had been sort of since I was a child. And I do recall watching it again, sort of, with quite a substantial amount of time in between, and thinking, oh, well, George Carlin's not in this all that much. I remembered him being in it more. But for me, that was kind of testament to the character of Rufus, because I genuinely thought Rufus was in it a lot more than he was.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I had, because he stood out so much the first time I watched it. I was like, the man that's in it for 90% of the movie, rather than like the man that's in it for like 9% of the movie.
Yeah, he's really just there for exposition. Is generally all he's there for, and to obviously explain the whole kind of theory of the Great Ones, and this is the utopia, and this is what has got to happen, and this is how we're going to do it. I think what I quite like is Rufus just generally is a man of very few words.
Yeah.
Because he just all he says, but he's this gentleman, puts his sunglasses on, and then something happens. But I do feel like, although he's not there for a long time, I do feel like he makes an impact, because for me, obviously, the main characters are Bill, I can't say their names, Bill, Ted, and Rufus. So yeah, I think he does make more of an impact than the time on screen would suggest that he does. But yeah, I know that obviously with the new movie coming out, they obviously would have wanted him to be in it. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, so he can't be in it. And I know that they've chosen not to recast, I believe, Rufus, because they feel like no one could be Rufus other than Rufus. In Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, there is a character essentially who is Death, who's very funny in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. And they are bringing the character of Death back for the sequel with the same actor.
That was
so yeah, I think that will be quite funny. But I do think that Rufus, I think he will be much missed actually in this third movie, because I do think
he's almost like a watcher, like a
yes, very much like their Giles. Just like teaching them the way, giving them the tools they need,
just guiding them through carefully. It's funny. There are so many historical characters in this movie. And only one of them is not white, and only one of them is a woman. I'm so obsessed with it.
I think that the choice of characters is interesting, because you've got obviously the likes of like American heroes, so to speak. You've got like the likes of like Abraham Lincoln and like Billy the Kid, and they're very kind of American sort of hero, historic kind of characters. But then I kind of feel like it goes for the names, so to speak. Like if you were making a historical movie, who would you choose? You'd choose Napoleon.
Yeah, literally.
Choose Beethoven.
Socrates, Freud.
Don't you mean Socrates?
Socrates.
Genuinely, I remember watching this movie when I was a kid. I genuinely thought that the pronunciation was Socrates for a long time.
Classic. I bet you're not alone in that.
No, well, the thing is, and also this movie, it feels very reminiscent of a very more, a much more modern movie. Well, actually, not really modern compared to this, thinking of it. A little bit more modern. It reminds me in its tone of Clueless in many ways.
Okay. I've not seen Clueless.
Oh, Clueless it's a modern classic. It's... I have actually just released an episode not long ago on Clueless, because it's one of my absolute favourites.
I was like, I really do need to watch that.
And it's funny because the character of Cher in Clueless is very outwardly not the most intelligent person in the room. Academically, she gets good grades by basically bartering for them rather than actually doing academic work. But there's one particular scene in Clueless where she talks about immigration. And again, it's something that is very relevant to now. And I think her argument for this debate on immigration that she has in her class is very reminiscent of a lot of arguments that people are still having about, immigration and stuff. And she basically, her argument is, well, she uses a birthday party for her father as an example. and she basically says, oh, well, you know, I sent out RSVPs and then loads of people came that didn't RSVP. So I had more people. So then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And then she was like, we basically went to the kitchen, we rearranged some stuff and we partied with them, you know, and it was very much that sort of, not a very kind of academic intelligence, but a real kind of emotional intelligence and societal intelligence that's very reminiscent of what Bill and Ted have. And also mispronunciation as well, because obviously Bill and Ted with Socrates, and Sharing Clueless mispronounces Haitians as Haitians, which was actually Elise Silverton, the actress. She mispronounced it and they kept it in.
Oh, cute.
So there's a lot of similarities there. And the character of Cher is very lovable, very likeable. Instantly, she's sweet, she's kind, she's not a bitch. You know, very much like Bill and Ted. So I think as companion pieces, I know it's weird companion piece to have, but I think
it makes sense. It's like,
I think it's very, very similar
vibe that they were going for,
yeah,
which must have been so refreshing during this time of like hardcore jocks and hardcore cheerleaders.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's funny how they managed to sneak in these like sweet, compassionate protagonists in there without us really noticing. Because you look on the outside, you look at the DVD covers, for example, and you'd be like, stupid morons and vapid cheerleader, but like it's not that at all, like at all.
Exactly, and I think it speaks to just the cleverness of the actual people who are writing these movies to actually say, well, you know, yeah, they could just be dumb jocks. Yes, you could just be a rich, vapid, blonde bitch. But actually, people have layers. People aren't just what they look like. People aren't just what they sound like. People aren't just their jobs or their families or school or whatever. People are people. And I think it sounds deep. It's actually not that deep when you really kind of look at it. And you know, I think there's a lot of judgment on, you know, like I say, how a person looks, how a person acts, how a person talks. But really, you've got to kind of look at the person. And I think that's something that Bill and Ted they just do so wonderfully, is that they are just really sweet, charming, lovely guys. And all they want to do is make music. And that is literally, that might seem vapid to some people, because you could argue, well, why don't they, you know, why doesn't he want to be a police officer like his dad? Or, you know, why don't they have bigger dreams? It's like, well, actually, no, that is a valid enough dream to want to be in a band and to want to change the world with music. That is a totally valid dream.
And they're not punished for it. If anything, they succeed beyond anyone's imaginations by literally forming a future society, a utopian society.
All by the power of wild stallions.
I love it so much.
Yeah, and it's one thing as well that I really love about this is it obviously talks about time travel, and I think that the version of time travel that we see in this film, it is a very simple way of time travel. But actually, if you look at it, it's actually not that simple, because scientific studies about time travel and everything have basically said that I think there are only two different possible explanations for principles of time travel, and one of them is predestination, which is what this movie deals with. And essentially, that is that everything that happens was always going to happen because it happened. And that nothing that anyone does will change that, because the future is set.
Okay.
So it's kind of like que sera, sera in its kind of purest, most enjoyable and delightful on-screen form. So it's like, it's really I find time travel in movies sometimes really difficult to get your head around, because so many different movies talk about time travel in their own way. And Back to the Future has its version of time travel, whereby anything that changes in the past will affect the future. And so that's why Marty has to go back in time to actually then change the future. But in this, they go back in time to make the future happen, but the future's already happened because they go back in time to make the future happen. So it's like a constant circle of, and it's kind of going back to the circle that I mentioned in the language, that they talk about something else, but they go back to the first thing and they constantly go back to it. It's like constant circles are like the easiest way to explain the time travel in this movie is that in the future, Bill and Ted are, they're idols. They are the great ones. They're the great ones because of their music, but they were only able to make the music because Rufus went back in time to help them pass history. So in their version of 1988, they got the help from the future that made the future possible because it already happens in the future.
Yeah.
So it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If you think that everything that happens to you in the future already happens, so even if you went back in time to the past, your future would still happen because you'd already gone back in time to the past.
Yeah, because it was always going to take into consideration you going back in time to the past.
Exactly.
Ah, that's really cool.
But that's what I love about it, and I love little things like these little threads that it comes back to, such as like Ted's dad saying, "I've lost my keys."
Yeah.
Ted, have you taken my keys? No, Dad, I didn't take your keys. But then it's established later on that so the keys are lost, but they're picked up later because Ted did take the keys. He travelled back in time, but unknown to his self at that point.
That was really interesting. A lot of stuff was happening because they'd previously gone back to sort that shit out. So as it was happening, they were reminding themselves to do it. Like, oh, we must remember to go put these keys back. Or we must remember to bring a trash can.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
But we never see them. It's not Back to the Future in that we never see them go back and set up these traps and stuff. And I was okay with that because I was like, this is just a really cute use of time travel.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of feel like it doesn't need to go back and show you.
No,
because you've already
time.
Exactly, you've already gone through the process of understanding their version of time travel.
Yeah.
So you don't need to then know. You don't need to see them, Ted, take the keys and then plant the keys, and then for future Bill and Ted to find the keys.
Yeah.
Because all you need to do is sort of say, well, if we remember to go back in time and take the keys and then plant the keys right now so we could pick them up, where would we put the keys? We'd put them behind this sign.
Yeah. We have.
It's just joyous. It's just, there is no movie ever that I think will just make you smile as much as this one does. I mean, there probably is, but it
lets
genuinely
itself
does.
just be so chill and fun. And I just really don't think that they let movies do that anymore.
No, because they're all about, obviously, movies nowadays, they have a certain amount of money spent. It has to, and a lot of movies now are obviously based on existing material. So they're either a reboot, a remake, a sequel, a prequel. Whereas this is it's a new idea. You don't really get new ideas now.
Yeah, you don't. You're not allowed them.
You're really not. It's all like to me, it often feels like Hollywood is just, I mean, it is a big machine, but it feels even more like a machine now because they have this calculation of risk.
Based on money. No one's making it for the passion or the want anymore. You have to be greenlit because it's guaranteed to make money, and the way they're making money right now is off nostalgia, which is why I was a bit I'm really glad that you're looking forward to the third installment of this, and I hope that by getting the original cast back in the way that they have, it will be true to it. The idea that they have kids in the third one weirds me out because they are kids in this one.
Yeah. Well, the babies are actually born. I don't know if it's, I assume it's the same babies, but the babies are born at the end of Bogus Journey. So they both have like babies, and I think that, well, they're the same age. So obviously they did it at the same time with their princess wives or whatever, and conceived babies, and they're exactly the same age. But yeah, I think it's quite interesting because I do remember at the end of Bill and Ted, the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, that because they call the babies, I think, Little Bill and Little Ted. So it insinuates that the babies are boys.
Yeah.
But obviously in this third movie, they're actually girls.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether they're going to explain that, or I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do with that. But but it just fills me with so much joy every single time I watch it. And I'll admit, I didn't own it on Blu-ray until we agreed to do this episode. And it's just something that I had in my my DVR box that I would just put on occasionally because I'd recorded it off the TV ages ago.
Yeah.
And so it was still there. But I don't have that box anymore. So I was like, look, if I want this, I'm going to have to go out and buy it. So yeah, I actually invested in the Blu-ray.
Nice.
And I'm actually quite impressed with the Blu-ray because the Blu-ray does make it look really good. And even some of the effects, I mean, they are obviously late 80s effects, but they actually still look quite decent.
And I think because most of it is practical effects.
Exactly, yeah.
And the only thing really is the time travel. And because it's time travel, you know, that's what it's meant to look like. It's meant to look like pixelated and weird and wavy. Like it's because time travel. Shut up. Like, do you know what I mean? Like they can get away with it because
exactly, because no one knows what time travel looks like.
It's time travel. that's just what it looks like. Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for like choosing this. Like it was a movie that I'd never really intended to go back and watch ever because I was just like, I've seen it. I like that'll probably do me. And it was really interesting to rewatch, to be like, God, this is an absolute cult classic, and I can see why. I have a lot of respect for movies that become cult, and I can totally see why this one is.
The other great thing about this movie is, like you say, it is a cult classic now. But the one thing I really love about the fact that this is a cult classic is that I think the word cult classic is often used for movies that maybe don't do so well on their first release, and then they get like a renaissance on usually like VHS or DVD or something like that, and then they become really popular. But Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure actually did do really well because I think it was made for like $10 million and it made like 50 million. So it was actually quite a success, you know, when we're talking about money and stuff like that. So I really love that it's called a cult classic, and and I really hope that with this third movie that people will go back to these first movies. Because Bogus Journey is fun. It is a fun movie. I just prefer this one because I think it has more heart, and I think it's just pure joy. And I think that the other thing that I really love about this, that I do actually want to just briefly touch on, is the fact that this movie does predict the future.
Ooh.
And I'll tell you how, because so obviously when they're talking about time travel, I'm not suggesting that time travel is a thing, because well, maybe it will be in the future, but I don't quite think scientists have managed to figure out time travel yet. But if you look at the way they time travel, you mentioned just a little bit ago about how it looks like time travel, and they're kind of going down these tubes essentially to get to the place in time that they want to go. And if you actually look at it with like a modern viewpoint, I believe that this movie actually predicts the future, because their method of time travel is a phone box. And obviously phone boxes, you don't really see them much nowadays. But back in the day, you used to go into a phone box, you used to make a call, sometimes with a coin, sometimes with a card. It was all very antiquated. But Rufus describes the method of time travel with the phone box as by going through the circuits of history. And they specifically use a phone book in the phone box. Phone boxes used to have phone books back in the day. It's all very old. But if you look at how they actually go through time, they go through these chutes, which kind of look like cables. They kind of look a little bit like telephone cables or fibre cables. And if you think about it, that is the way we access the internet. So we have a cable that goes into our house, whether it's telephone or via the cable, and then we send off little packets of information through those cables, little telephone boxes, so to speak, and then we use a search engine to find what we want to go. So if we want to know the history of Napoleon, we will go onto Google, type in Napoleon, and it will go off and it will get that information for us. And really, that is essentially what everyone is doing now. Everyone's going on Wikipedia or Google, searching for information on characters or people or historical people or events or whatever, and then bringing that information back for things like presentations or that sort of thing. So I'm putting it out there. This movie predicts the future. It predicted the future in like the late 80s. It predicted the internet.
Well, the internet became a thing in 1989, and I imagine this would have been filmed in 1988, so they couldn't
Yeah,
have
it was.
known about it. So
Exactly.
they just I dig it. I'll buy it.
Does it not just make you love it a little bit more though?
Yeah, it's cute. It is really, really
It really
cute.
is. It's very rudimentary kind of explanation for the internet. I'm not suggesting that, they're mini telephone boxes in our cables that shoot off with little mini Bill and Ted.
I get it. It makes sense.
But yeah,
I like it.
It's very rudimentary, but I think it's a really great way of understanding actually how we get our information, how we retrieve our information, how we digest our information. Because literally, I swear, everyone who's listening to this podcast, at least once a day, will go on Google and search for something, even if it's a recipe or a TV guide or, information about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because hopefully people will be. But that bit of information goes off, comes back, and it gives you all of the information that you need to know. And that is essentially what Bill and Ted are doing in this movie.
I like
Except they're bringing back the actual characters.
The actual people.
The actual
We're
people, yeah.
totally cool with that. Amazing.
I know.
Do you want to tell us about Verbal Diorama?
Oh, okay, if I mess. Well, so I host a podcast called Verbal Diorama. I like to talk about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. As I've mentioned, I do have several episodes featuring films of Keanu Reeves. I don't just cover Keanu Reeves. I also am a big fan of animation, so I've covered quite a lot of animation. But literally anything and everything is featured on my podcast. Like I say, it's movies you know, movies you don't. I'm just trying to think, how else can I sell this? I'm not very good at selling my own podcast, sorry.
It's fine.
But yeah, obviously you can download Verbal Diorama wherever you get your podcasts from. I am on Twitter, which is just @Verbal Diorama. I'm also on Instagram @Verbal Diorama, and on Facebook @Verbal Diorama, because I'm the only person in the world weird enough to call their podcast Verbal Diorama. So yeah, and obviously, and I have a website as well, which is just verbaldiorama.com. And and I also the reason that Emily and I actually met in the first place was I also do bits of writing on the side. So I also write for Film Stories, and I would just like to give them a bit of a plug just generally, because they are an independent movie magazine. They're also a website as well, and it's run by some really wonderful people. And feel free to check out the magazine. You can purchase back copies of the magazine and stuff online. I do a weekly British podcast recommendation, which is coincidentally how I met Emily in the first place, because I recommended this very podcast that I'm talking on. Now I think it's the greatest podcast in the world, other than my own, because I'm on it. So
Film podcast.
Yeah, you can find me wherever. If you want to talk about Keanu Reeves, anyone wants to talk about Keanu Reeves, I am there for that.
Hell yeah. You've got such a great lineup on your podcast. You go from Treasure Planet to Spirited Away. You do some Spider-Man, Lego Movie. Like, I am a huge animation fan, so I've got all of those saved up to listen to. I'm very excited
wonderful.
to get through them.
They were that particular season for me. I did a whole animation season, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. I'm passionate about a lot of things, obviously, but I'm very passionate about animation specifically because I feel like animation is seen as the lesser cousin to live action.
Yes, and it's really not.
It's not. You can do so much more with animation. It's so much more rich and varied than people give it credit for. And also, I would just like to add, animation is not a genre.
Thank you!
I am bored of people saying that animation is a genre.
Say it louder for the people at the back. I have been placarding this around every building I've ever been to. Stop fucking, it needs its own award season. I mean, it has its own award season, but it needs more than just best animated movie at the Oscars. What? No, it's not a genre. It's a medium. It's like a form.
It's so much more expressive than live action as well, because you have limitations in live action that you possibly can't have in animation, because animation you can do anything. You can make someone fly and it will be so much more realistic than any live action flight. And that's one of the reasons why I did that season, just to highlight some really brilliant animated movies that are out there. I actually do want to do another season. I'm not sure whether I will or whether I'll just do it because there's so many others. So I have got a couple more animated ones on my schedule because I did obviously a few of the Studio Ghibli movies, and that is just, I mean, there's anything and everything the Studio Ghibli put out is just phenomenal. But I know a lot of people were exactly.
Like, there's a Studio Ghibli for literally everyone, regardless of who you are and what you like.
Yeah, and the output is pretty much consistently phenomenal. But a lot of people were very upset about Princess Mononoke not being in that lineup, and that was literally only because I had 3 slots, and that was it. So Princess Mononoke is coming.
Yes.
But it will probably have come before this episode goes out.
Yeah.
So if you're listening now, it's probably already out.
Hooray!
Hooray!
Yeah, absolute classic. Thank you so much. It has been so fun to meet you over Zoom. Zoom.
You're welcome. It's been incredible to talk to you, and yeah, I've always kind of felt like you're the type of person that I'd really get on with. So I wasn't worried or nervous or anything. I was just like, let's do this. We are just going to get on like a house on fire, and we do.
We do. Oh my god! You're literally me. We are the same.
We are the same. We kind of also have the same name as well, which is kind of weird.
To the point where I actually thought you had my name for some reason. I was like, M must be an Emily. Can't possibly be anything else.
No.
So
well, yeah, we pretty much are the same person, which is bizarre.
Which is amazing.
And amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And we will see you next time on Why This Film. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy Why This Film, why not head to iTunes and leave us a review? And you can now support Why This Film on Patreon from as little as £1 a month. Just head to patreon.com/Why This Film Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at Why This Film Podcast, on Instagram at Why This Film Podcast, and on Twitter at Why This Film Pod. If you'd like to come on the show and talk about your favourite childhood movie, email into us at whythisfilmpodcast@gmail.com.